In breaking news, baby Priya's bill is now law, and the pro-abortion establishment has shown us exactly who they are in this debate. Now, we didn't win yesterday in the parliament. The bill is now law. It now applies to late-term abortions. Any woman in this country who has a late-term abortion can force her employer to pay her paid parental leave. That is just gross and vile. But the good news is cracks are starting to show, and I'm going to debrief what happened in the parliament over the last week, and particularly yesterday when Labor and the Greens did a dirty deal. So we didn't get victory, but we are making a difference. That's today on The Dr. Jo Show. So thank you for joining me on this important episode of the show as we really debrief what happened in the parliament. The media doesn't cover this, so that's why this is so important. If you are new here, can I ask you to please subscribe to our channel? If you're a returning viewer, please subscribe. Why haven't you subscribed yet? The more subscriptions, the bigger our movement grows, the more we can push this content out. So what happened in the last week in the parliament is very, very interesting because out of nowhere, the issue of late-term abortion became very prominent on the national agenda. And that was really because of us. And we can take full credit for putting that issue there. This was not something that anyone had been talking about. But last week, we aired an episode of The Dr. Jo Show accompanied by a video that really explained that Labor's baby Priya Bill actually forces employers to pay paid parental leave for late-term abortions. No one had brought this issue up at all, except for us. And so that's why we know we can take credit for creating the firestorm that ensued, for putting this firmly on the agenda. The media covers this up. Labor had sold baby Priya's bill as being about compassion to women who face the tragedy of a stillbirth or a neonatal death. So baby Priya's mum, she lost baby Priya, I think it was 42 days after birth. Baby Priya was 25 weeks old, so born prematurely and died of natural causes. This was a total tragedy. Her mum was devastated. Her employer then expected her to return to work. And so Labor has pushed baby Priya's bill to say that if you have a stillborn or a neonatal death, a baby that dies shortly after birth, you're entitled for paid parental leave. Whatever it is in your employment contract, you're entitled to that. And as I said on the show last week at the University of Adelaide, that would be 6 months at $100,000. So it's a lot of money. It's a big entitlement. And we do need to make sure that it's being done correctly. And what we exposed last week is that under the Fair Work Act, the baby Priya's bill relies on the Fair Work Act section 77 to get the definition of a stillborn child. And we showed that there's no differentiation around abortion. There's no exclusion. And that if you have a late-term abortion, you are going to be able to claim this payment. Quick recap, the method for a late-term abortion is to produce a stillborn child. The baby's heart gets injected with poison. The mother goes into labor. She delivers a stillborn baby. So a stillborn baby is delivered, and under baby Priya's bill, they can get access to paid parental leave for intentionally killing their baby. Now, when we broke this news via the Dr. Jo Show, but also on Instagram, Facebook, and all of the other socials channels that were on, I put some of your money behind it, donations that people give, in order to get that news out to a lot of people quickly. The algorithm doesn't push out our content. We're just too controversial. There's too many complaints from the trolls, which means they suppress our content. Being able to put money behind it meant we were able to reach a huge audience. So overall, our views on the baby Priya issue have reached millions of accounts, even though the mainstream media has completely covered this up. And Labor sold this bill as being about compassion to women who have tragedies, who face unintended tragedies. And yet they're using it as well for late-term abortions. Even though they sold it as that and they didn't tell anyone the truth, we were able to get the truth out there. And after we broke that news on socials, the next day in the parliament, 4 coalition MPs spoke up. So this is Andrew Hastie, Tony Passon, Barnaby Joyce and Henry Pike. And in particular, I think we need to acknowledge Andrew Hastie because he really had the most to lose. He's a future Prime Minister. He's someone that is charismatic, very intelligent, has a great gift in being able to relate to people. And people know that he is a future Prime Minister. And yet he chose to say to the government, he gave a speech in the Federation Chamber and he said, I support baby Priya's bill. I support the idea that we would give women access to this leave if they've had a natural stillbirth or a tragedy of a neonatal death like Priya's mum. But he said, I want to ask the government, does this bill apply to late-term abortions? Because on all of the legal advice I've received, it does. And he said, I'm against late-term abortion, and this is not what you said was the intention of the bill. So he asked Labor that very direct question. And the other 3 MPs also spoke about it in the parliament. And kudos to them for their courage, because they knew the pile-on that would ensue from the left. They knew that it would happen from the left and from the media in cahoots, just this massive pile-on. And it did ensue, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But Andrew Hastie and the other 3 guys, they asked that question. Labor has refused to answer it directly. We know that this bill, on the basis of the definitions in it and on the information that was given through that leaked letter earlier in the year from Katie Gallagher's office, which confirmed that the government pays paid parental leave for late-term abortions. That letter from Katie Gallagher's office confirms that they themselves paid government-funded maternity leave for late-term abortions, for intentional abortions. That's in the letter. So we knew that it was already happening from the government. Now they're forcing employers to do it, but they've refused to acknowledge it directly because they know how bad it looks. So after this happened and these four guys did this, the media went into overdrive. It started with the Nightly, then two journalists from the Sydney Morning Herald, then the SBS, then the ABC, all of them piling on these men. The narrative from all of them was, how dare these four men speak about abortion? And to top it all off, Cheek Media by Hannah Ferguson, which is, we've talked about her a lot on this show, but Georgie Purcell as well, had this post saying, oh no, the men are talking again. So these four men knew this would happen, and happen it did. But what we have to applaud is their outstanding courage in speaking up against the pro-abortion establishment, knowing full well the cost that would then happen the next day. Now, even though the pro-abortion media establishment went into overdrive, I also, with your help, guys, went into overdrive. We published video after video responding to every single media hit piece. I was able to go on to Peter Credlin on Sky News and speak about the issue. So we were able to, plus boosting it using your donations, we were able to actually counter the power of the mainstream media on this issue. My team quickly set up an email, email thing where you guys could email all of the senators and say to them, please amend this bill to exclude late-term abortions. And we had hundreds of emails going out from that link that we set up. All of this within a 48-hour period, because it had to be done by Monday, which is yesterday, because we knew that it was going to be debated in the Senate on Monday. But what we didn't know was the dirty deal that Labor would do with the Greens to force the bill through in the Senate without any debate. What we found out yesterday at 10 a.m. was that Labor had done a deal with the Greens to guillotine debate, so to remove the committee stage that the bill normally would have gone through. The committee stage would have meant that Minister Katie Gallagher in the upper house, in the Senate, would have had to stand there while questions were asked of her about the bill. I had been working with several politicians in the Senate about the types of questions that needed to be asked. Labor didn't want her to have to answer any of these questions because they knew how bad it would look. They knew we would make videos about it. So they guillotined the debate so that she just didn't have to do it. They cut the time down and they put a limit on it and said there has to be a vote on this by 1 p.m. So they gave it less than 2 hours for this to take place. Do not underestimate how extraordinary this is, because we're meant to be in a democracy. We're meant to have the Senate as a house of review. They're meant to be able to look at legislation, at potential legislation, and ask questions. And that's the role of the Senate. Labor with the Greens completely stopped that from happening in one authoritarian foul swoop. They did that. And you know why they did it? They did it because of us. We're the only ones doing this, guys. We were the only organisation in the country to lead on this issue. I know that ACL, Family First and Canberra Deck then jumped on board. Other people did jump on board, and that's good, and I'm grateful for that. But we were the ones who led this, and we're also the only ones who's actually making videos on what's happening in the Parliament. Labor is so terrified of that they forced this bill through without Katie Gallagher having to answer these questions. Now, I was working with some politicians over the weekend, drafting some questions, and these are the questions that Katie Gallagher was going to be asked, but she got to avoid answering because they guillotined debate. So we were going to ask her, does the bill require an employer to pay paid parental leave for a late-term abortion? That's the million-dollar question that Labor has refused to answer, and that no journalist in the mainstream media has held them to account on. Now, I think what Katie Gallagher would have said is, these are tragic, complex situations. No woman chooses this lightly. These women deserve our compassion. Labor supports the right to choose. These are babies that were going to die anyway. These are women whose lives were at risk. These are rare and tragic circumstances. So that's what she would have waxed on about if we'd been able to ask that question of her in the Senate. And so we had a follow-up question planned, which is this one. Based on SA data, 75% of late-term abortions kill healthy babies in situations where the mum's life is not at risk. So why should an employer have to pay a woman paid parental leave for intentionally killing a healthy baby? We had more questions planned that we were not able to ask because of the authoritarian behaviour of Labor and the Greens, but I'm going to tell you them just so you know them. So we're going to ask, does the minister understand that in a late-term abortion, the baby is delivered stillborn because of an injection of potassium chloride into the baby's heart, and that this therefore meets the definition under Section 77A2 of the Fair Work Act? So we're going to ask that question to get the method of a late-term abortion in the Hansard and to force the minister to confront the fact that late-term abortions are intentional stillborns. This is something that Labor's been trying to cover up. Mark Butler last week, he's the health minister, he said, how dare these four men conflate an abortion, a late-term abortion, with a stillborn. And this was just such sort of smoke and mirrors to disguise the fact that the reality of a late-term abortion is that it is a stillborn baby. It's an intentional stillborn. And in fact, what we were saying is that they were the ones conflating the two. It's the baby Priya Bill that conflates an intentional stillborn with the tragedy of a natural stillborn. We made that point on social media and pushed that reel out there about Mark Butler. That one is close to 1 million views across the platform. So I'm glad that we were able to expose him, given that he's not held to account by the media. The next question we were going to ask was, the bill is based on the situation of baby Priya, who tragically died unintended, natural causes, shortly after birth. Why does this bill force employers to pay for intentional deaths, for murder of babies like Priya? Now, we know that another one of their lines would be, oh, well, no woman would ever do this. Like, no one's ever having a late-term abortion to rort the system, to intentionally make this money. No one's doing this. I mean, never mind the fact that this is an extraordinary payment. Like, if you have a late-term abortion, you can already get $22,000 from the government for paid parental leave. Now, with baby Priya's bill, you can get a top-up from your employer that's going to dwarf that government payout. So for me, it's $122,000 for a late-term abortion. Is the government seriously saying that people wouldn't do this because of the monetary incentive? The question we were then going to say is, well, we all know that the Howard government's baby bonus has been rorted. There's a lot of media and reports to show that that $5,000 payment for carrying your baby for 40 weeks was the result of a lot of deliberate pregnancies, coercion by abusive male partners to get these girls pregnant in order to claim the payment. And so we would have asked the question, well, if there were rorts to get a payment for $5,000 for 40 weeks of pregnancy, if you can be pregnant for half the time and get 7 times the amount, of course there's going to be rorts. Why do you think that this won't ever result in rorts? And so we're going to ask that question, but we won't know the answer because they stopped us asking it. And then the final question we were going to ask was about conscientious objection. Can employers who have a conscientious objection to abortion up to birth, can they conscientiously object to paying paid parental leave for late-term abortions? So they shut down all of that debate. We weren't able to ask any of those questions, but they are issues that we are now going to keep talking about in the months ahead until we can stop this, because now that this bill has passed, employers are forced to pay paid parental leave for late-term abortions. There's no ability to conscientiously object. There's no safeguard against rorts. This allows the payment of this money for healthy babies being killed, being murdered. So, we weren't able to ask the questions there, but that's the power of this medium. And if you guys share this video, comment, forward it to friends, we are going to, be able to get the word out ourselves, which is really important, because they might be able to shut down the debate in the parliament, but they can't shut down us. So that's why this is really important. Now, the next thing that happened after they shut down debate was that they were forced to allow any amendments to be introduced. And so there were 3 amendments that we introduced. I'm just going to go through them in turn because you guys need to know what happened. The first amendment was Senator Malcolm Roberts, who introduced an amendment to say you can't use baby Priya's bill to force employers in the case of intentional stillborns. Now, his amendment only attracted 7 votes. The next amendment was Alex Antic, and I think this is the amendment we really need to focus on. This amendment was slightly better drafted than Malcolm's. They're very similar. They did the same thing, but Alex Antic's amendment had a definition of what an intentional stillborn is, and he excluded any intentional killing of a baby either before birth or shortly after birth, so a failure to give medical care to a baby who survives their abortion, that is cut out from the purview of baby Priya's bill. Now, if we asked any person on the street, I would say 99% of Australians would agree with Alex Antic's amendment that you shouldn't get paid parental leave for a baby you deliberately killed. You shouldn't be able to profit from a late-term abortion. And yet Alex Antick's amendment only got 9 votes and 41 votes against. Now, we knew even when we broke the news of Baby Priya's bill and the fact that it could do this is that we were not going to win this campaign because Labor and the Greens have the majority in the Senate. Unfortunately, that election earlier this year was a total whitewash. The Labor and the Greens now dominate in the House of Reps and in the Senate. They can get the most radical legislation through without any scrutiny or accountability. So we went on this campaign, spent all this money, did all this work, knowing we were going to lose, but knowing that it was very important that we not let this slide, that we speak up for the babies, that we at the very least hold them to account for what they were going to do. So we knew Alex Antick's amendment wasn't going to get up. We knew Malcolm Roberts' amendment wasn't going to get up, but we did it anyway, and it was important to do. But I do want to highlight the fact that Alex managed to attract 9 votes for his amendment. There were 4 other coalition women who sided with him. So all of that mainstream media garbage about, oh my gosh, the men are talking. It's these, misogynistic coalition men. Where are they now when there's 4 amazing coalition women who stood with Alex and supported his amendment? And I really want to, congratulate Leah Blythe, Jess Collins, Sarah Henderson, and particularly Jacinta Price. I think this is actually a standout moment for us that Andrew Hastie and Jacinta Price sided with us on this issue of late-term abortion. These are the 2 brightest hopes for the Conservative movement in the Liberal Party. And I'm so pleased that we now have it on the record that they are with us on late-term abortion. And I think that's actually a fantastic victory for us. Also supporting Alex's amendment, there were 3 One Nation senators and Senator Ralph Babette, who has remained faithful throughout all of this. Now, the 41 people that voted against this amendment, this very sensible amendment. So we had all of the Greens, we had most of Labor. Very interesting whenever there's one of these votes, like the Labor Party had a party position, so they didn't allow a conscience vote on this issue, on Baby Priya's bill and on this amendment. But very interesting, Deb O'Neill, Helen Polly, Don Farrell, who we know are the Labor right pro-life members of the party, they just don't turn up to vote. So they're not allowed to vote against the party, so they couldn't vote for Alex's amendment. But they also didn't turn up to the chamber to vote against the amendment. You've just got the radical leftists from the party, of which there's such an overwhelming majority, who voted against Alex's very sensible amendment. I think it's good at the very least that Helen and Deb and Don didn't vote, but I also think we have to stop thinking that because there's a few token pro-life members of the Labor Party, that they're a party that's on our side. They're just not. And I really think that that's just a message we need to get out, that until Labor properly changes its ways, Labor and the Greens have to be last and bottom last on every person's voting card. Because even though there might be like a tokenistic pro-life member, MP, we cannot control the direction of that party because we don't have the numbers. The left is in the ascendant. And so when you vote for Labor thinking, oh, well, my local member is pro-life, well, you're just being deluded. They are not on our side at all. And also making up that 41, in addition to Labor and the Greens, was 3 Liberal MPs. Shame on them. We're going to do some videos on them in a minute. You're going to see those videos, particularly on Anne Ruston from the Liberals. We're going to really do a campaign around her. She spoke against Alex's amendment. That's just so gross. Like, she was actually justifying paid parental leave for late-term abortions. And then there were some Teals and also Fatima Payman. So that made up the 41. But one surprise there was Matt Canavan. Now, Matt Canavan is someone we've always thought is fully on our side, fully pro-life, partly because he brought in the Babies Born Alive bill into the federal parliament. But I was really disheartened to see he didn't vote for Alex's amendment. I mean, that is something that we have to call out, because people can't take the pro-life banner, they can't tell us they're conservative and then not vote to save these babies. Like, you just don't get to do that. And so I headed over to Matt's Facebook page to try and understand why, because we didn't get a chance to speak about this. I would have wanted to talk to him about it, but this is what he wrote. I've been contacted by lots of people concerned that this bill would extend rights of parental leave in circumstances where a termination was intentional. These concerns deserved investigation. Unfortunately, because the government silenced debate, we could not have a Senate inquiry. We did not get an opportunity to consider these issues in detail, nor did we hear from the thousands of Australians concerned. There were amendments moved to the bill, but these were written at the last minute thanks to the Labor and Greens shortening debate. Some of these amendments sought to prevent rights being extended where a termination was intentional. I sought to amend the amendments to ensure we protected the rights of mothers who have to terminate a pregnancy to protect their health. This is a very hard position for mothers and fathers to be in, and I do not want the law to intrude into such difficult circumstances. I could not support amendments that did not include such protections. So Matt Canavan is essentially saying that he supports late-term abortion. That supports a mother's health. I mean, what? That is what? Like that is actually the cover story that they use for pretty much all late-term abortions. They either kill them because they're disabled, because of this disgusting eugenicist rationale that the baby's disabled, we've got to get rid of him, or because of this euphemism that it's about the mother's health. That's 100% of all late-term abortions are for those two reasons. The vast majority, so in South Australia, 75% of abortions are on this euphemistic reason about the mother's health. They're not to save the mother's life, because if the mother's life was actually at risk, you could do an emergency cesarean and get the baby out alive. These late-term abortions are intending to kill that baby, deliver that baby stillborn, because the mother has claimed a non-life-threatening physical health reason or because of mental illness. And that's typically the one that's used to kill these babies. Never mind that we could just induce these babies alive and give treatment to the mother for her mental health problem and give care to that baby in the NICU. Matt Canavan writing this on his Facebook and refusing to vote for Alex's amendments because he supports late-term abortions in the case of a mother's health. Well, that just means you support late-term abortions for every reason other than disability. And that's just gross. And so I'm really, really disappointed with this. Matt Canavan did introduce an amendment then. So he amended Alex Antick's amendment to say, let's not have paid parental leave for late-term abortions unless they need it for the mother's health. So that's what he did. He got 18 votes, so he didn't pass either. So, I feel pretty gutted that Matt did that. I also feel really horrified that this is the quality of the people in our parliament, that 41 of them, particularly Labor and the Greens, really need to be exposed, and Anne Ruston from the Libs for siding with them on this issue. Like this is just so gross. But the good news is, guys, we're making a difference. Like they guillotined debate and they shortened all of this, and they didn't let Katie Gallagher speak because they knew of the videos we were going to make. And we're still going to make the videos. We've got more videos planned on this issue, and we're going to keep exposing it. So 2 action items to wrap all of this together. The first is we now have to ramp up our campaign to stop Labor's late-term abortion bonus. We've been running this campaign all year. We were running it about government-funded paid parental leave. We're now going to extend this to employer-funded parental leave. Like, why is there all of this paid parental leave, all of this cash money for women who intentionally kill their healthy babies right up until birth? And so we've got that petition. It's got over 60,000 signatures. But as I keep saying, we really need it to have more than 100,000. So you guys can help me with that. Second action item, the rally in South Australia next Wednesday, that's to save these little healthy, viable babies. It's about banning abortion after 23 weeks. We're trying to save 75% of the babies that are currently being injected with poison via late-term abortion in SA. Now, I want to save all the babies. You guys know that, but we have to start somewhere. That rally's on 5:30 on November 12 on the steps of the Parliament. It's when the vote is taking place. And, no matter where you are in the country, please consider flying in for this rally. If you're in South Australia, you've literally got no excuse not to be there. There's nothing more important than this. So they can shut down debate in the Parliament, but they can't shut down us. So thank you for watching. I'm going to see you next week on Wednesday, and that's today on The Dr. Jo Show.